Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Christianly. This is your host, Brad Andrews. Thanks for joining us for this week's edition. And we just want to remind you that this podcast is a way for you to cultivate holy courage. And we do that by looking at issues in our culture through a biblical lens so that you grow in your confidence. We don't talk about cultural issues just for the sake of it. We want to talk about the bigger truths that find themselves underneath that. And what we do each week is look at three different issues together that I believe are important for you to know about, important for you to understand, and to consider what your response to that might be. Again, it's maybe to go deeper and consider what's underneath these issues. We usually do one deep dive sandwiched around two other shorter issues in length. And the goal is to try to keep this really tight, around 30 minutes or less, so that every episode is really focused and it's worth your time. So let's get started. Issue number one. There are moments when a single legislative proposal reveals far more than policy ever intended. It exposes what a culture is willing to rename in order to avoid what it claims it can no longer define.
New York Democrats argue the words mother and father are outdated and need to be replaced with more inclusive terms under state law. All that's needed now is Governor Kathy Hochul's signature. So if Hochul approves, in New York's family court and in domestic and education law, a mother would be labeled as a gestating parent, a father as a non-gestating parent, and paternity proceedings to determine the child's father would be called parentage proceedings. The bill passed the state Senate this week and the state assembly back in March. Governor Hochul proudly calls herself New York's first mom governor. It's unclear if she'll support this change, though.
I'm not familiar with what was introduced late last night, so I'll take a look at it. I have until the end of the year to review them and make a decision, so I won't be commenting on pending legislation.
New York would join other states like Massachusetts, California, Connecticut, and Colorado to change the definition and wording of parents in their state laws. Democrats argue the bill is necessary to accommodate surrogacy cases and same-sex couples. Now, Governor Hochul's up for re-election this year. Her main challenger, Republican Nassau County Executive Bruce Blakeman, tells Fox this morning this bill is a continuation of war declared on families by Democrats.
If you thought the story that you just heard in the clip was from the pages of the Babylon Bee, think again. This is not satire. This is actual lawmaking. The New York State legislature has approved legislation that would replace the words mother and father in significant portions of state law with terms like gestating parent and non-gestating parent. In the assembly, the bill passed 91 to 46, with 86 Democrats and 5 Republicans supporting this measure. Really, only a handful of lawmakers stood against it, as you heard in that vote. The legislation now awaits the signature of New York Governor Kathy Hochul. By the way, this is quite a step down for dads who get defined only by a negative, right? But the state is not simply changing vocabulary here. It is attempting to change reality. In a recent World Magazine article, Albert Mohler observed that what is happening in New York is an example of what C.S. Lewis famously called verbicide. Lewis described that to be the murder of words. Lewis understood that words are not random noises. They carry worlds within them. They preserve truths. They preserve relationships and meaning. And if you change a word's meaning, you eventually change the reality that the word was created to describe. And that is exactly why this story matters for us. The battle in this story is actually not really about grammar. It's about anthropology. What is a human being? What is a family? What is a mother? What is a father? For most of human history, these questions required no debate, because most accepted what Scripture had to say about it. We know in Genesis it states that male and female, He created them. It was from that creation order that comes marriage, and then from marriage comes children, and from children come future mothers and fathers. So every civilization worthy of the name has understood this reality until recently, it seems. And what I mean by that is we do not invent mothers, we just named them. We don't create fathers, we recognize them. Those words emerged because the realities existed first. Now, legislators are attempting to reverse the process, and they hope that if they can erase the language, they can erase the distinctions. Now, they may not say it that way, but that's what they're doing. The architects of these kinds of what I would call mini revolutions actually understand something that many Christians don't. If you control the language, you can influence perception. If you can redefine words and you reshape then the assumptions, you can change much larger things. In fact, that's what every larger revolution eventually attacks: vocabulary. The goal is always the same. If you can alter the language, you can destabilize truth. Interestingly, the proposed legislation openly admits this. A report that supports the bill explained that concepts of parenthood have, quote, shifted dramatically in recent years. And so New York's legal framework must be, quote, modernized. Now that word says quite a bit to me, modernized. But modernized toward what? Toward greater clarity or toward greater confusion? Because replacing mother with gestating parent is the opposite of clarity. It is confusion dressed up in inclusive language. I actually want to give credit to the New York Catholic bishops who released a statement on this issue, and they said that they wanted to warn everybody that the proposal would further muddy what is true and good. That's exactly right. Though I might add that muddying what is true and good appears to be the point. So in other words, what they're doing is not a bug, it's a feature. The objective is not precision, but actually subversion. Again, the solution, according to the ideologues who have put this forward, is to attack the words. But again, words are not the real target here. It's what sits underneath those words that is, namely, truth. That is why you should pay attention to stories like this. Many believers see stories like this and they shrug. They assume that it's merely another strange political story from a distant state, and it's not. Certain truths must remain fixed if society is to function. Marriage must mean something. Parenthood must mean something. Man and woman must mean something. Maybe the most encouraging part of this story, in addition to the Catholic bishops that I just mentioned, was from outside of Albany, there in New York. On Long Island, Hempstead town supervisor, a guy by the name of John Ferretti, introduced a local resolution preserving the words mother and father in its town code. He said the issue became very personal for him when his 9-year-old daughter overheard a conversation about the proposed legislation and asked him about it. And I just reminded that out of the mouth of babes often comes wisdom. Children often know what many legislators have forgotten. They know the words father and mother are not oppressive. They know that those concepts are actually their gifts. And deep down, most adults know that too. And now for our deep dive issue number 2. Sometimes the real conflict in a public controversy is not what people say. It's what they're not allowed to say without consequence. And that line is moving faster than most people realize, even in the world of sports.
You know, the rainbow is a symbol of God's covenant to us, and us as believers stand firm in that. But it's not anything, you know, it's like, there's no hate at all. It's just what I stand for and what I stand in. I believe in God.
Last Friday night in San Francisco, California, what was supposed to be another Major League Baseball game turned into something much bigger. And it's still going on, the conversation around it. It's something we've talked about actually before on this podcast. During that evening, it was actually the Giants' Pride Night, and several Giants pitchers made a statement that sent sports media and progressive commentators into an absolute frenzy. A starting pitcher, Landon Roop, wrote Genesis 9:12 through 16 on the Pride nightcap he was given. Reliever J.T. Brubaker wrote Genesis 9:13 through 15 on his. Reliever Sam Hingages reportedly declined to wear the Pride-themed cap altogether, and another reliever, Ryan Walker, appeared to write a message on his cap as well, though it was difficult to make out exactly what was on his hat. In fact, if the hats weren't enough, the Giants also that same evening hosted same-sex vow renewals before the game for 10 same-sex couples. Now, in the video that you just heard at the top of this segment, Roop explained his actions, why he did what he did. He said the passage on his hat reflected his personal Christian beliefs. He was trying to point people to God's covenant with Noah after the flood in the form of a rainbow. He even encouraged LGBTQ fans to read the Bible for themselves. And again, almost immediately, the outrage machine roared to life. Grant Brisbee, a writer at The Athletic, complained that players had turned a night meant for inclusion into something else entirely. Another baseball publication described the gesture as a blatant protest. One of the San Francisco Giants commentators labeled Genesis 9, a verse commonly used by homophobes, and called the players' actions bigoted and embarrassing. Now, I want you to notice the framing of all that. According to the critics, the problem was that several players made Pride Night about themselves. But as Pastor Josh Howerton commented on this situation on X, they said it backwards. Here's what Howerton said. He said, the players did not initiate the controversy. They were handed it. Players who held 2,000-year-old Christian convictions were expected in this moment to participate without objection. And when some of them referenced Scripture, suddenly they became the divisive ones. So as we talk about issues like this, I think it's important to understand that the response from those who claim to be tolerant is often, well, intolerant. The old definition of tolerance meant this: allowing people to hold beliefs that you disagreed with. But the new definition means this: affirming beliefs you disagree with. In other words, disagreement is permitted only if it flows in one direction. Christians, in other words, must tolerate everyone else, but increasingly everyone else is told they need to not tolerate Christians. So let's just think about this issue for a moment historically. For years, we were told that all the LGBTQ movement wanted was tolerance. They said things like, just leave us alone, or what consenting adults do in private is none of your business. And many people accepted that argument. But what began as demands for tolerance has quickly evolved into something else. Really, it's a demand now for inclusion and participation and even celebration. But I would argue that we have likely arrived at the final stage of all of this: punishment for dissent. It seems now that the issue is whether Christians will be allowed to disagree. And that is an entirely different issue to me. That is why I think so many activists and commentators, even in this story we saw, became enraged when Christians like Roop and others simply stated their biblical convictions. What I mean by that is the issue was not disagreement. The issue was disobedience. Christians are now expected to affirm what their own Scripture condemns. They're expected to celebrate what God Himself calls sin. They are expected to even publicly signal loyalty to a kind of moral vision that directly contradicts their faith. And what happens if they refuse? Well, you heard it in the story today. They're labeled as hateful and divisive, intolerant, and maybe the worst misnomer, bigoted. So let's consider the actual biblical passage that Roop referenced. Genesis 9 records God's covenant with Noah after the flood. And the rainbow that was given then as a sign was a sign that God would never again destroy the earth through a global flood. In other words, the rainbow belongs to God before it belongs to anything else. Long before activists adopted the rainbow was already a symbol It pointed to divine mercy, to divine patience. It pointed to a divine covenant. In the scriptures, the rainbow does not celebrate man's autonomy. It celebrates God's authority. And that is why Christians like Roop and previously Dodgers pitcher Clayton Kershaw, who also wrote a Bible verse on his hat at last year's Dodgers Pride Night, have referenced Genesis 9. They are trying to remind people that God established the meaning of the rainbow way before any modern political movement existed. So I say this, if you're going to force Christians to wear a rainbow, you should not be surprised or shocked when those people remind everyone, Christians, what the rainbow originally meant. In our cultural moment, the dispute about sexuality isn't really over symbols anyways. It's over reality, just like the story we highlighted earlier by the New York lawmakers attempting to change the language of reality. In both of these stories, we really see this. It's a question, who gets to define reality? Or another question, who gets to define marriage or gender? Who gets to define human nature or morality? See, the modern West increasingly insists that individuals possess that authority. But Christianity insists something differently, that it is God who does. And really, that is the conflict underneath every Pride Night controversy. That is why the language used by critics is so revealing. Another writer argued that LGBTQ existence should not be considered a matter of morality, but that's completely incoherent from a Christian standpoint. But really, every worldview makes moral judgments. Every worldview draws lines somewhere. It declares some behaviors worthy of celebration and others worthy of condemnation. The question is not whether morality exists. The question is whose morality is right. The secular progressive answer is becoming very, very clear. Their morality must govern. Their morality must govern over all dissenters. Alexander Solzhenitsyn warned about this decades ago. His famous admonition was very simple: live not by lies. See, he understood something about totalitarianism. Most forms of tyranny do not begin with prison camps. They begin with things like compelled speech. They begin when citizens are required to affirm what they know is false. They begin when disagreement becomes unacceptable. And like Pride Nights, they begin when people must publicly participate in ideological rituals. I'm grateful that America is not the Soviet Union, but many Christians increasingly recognize elements of what he's talking about. Rod Dreher actually wrote a book called Live Not by Lies, and he calls what's happening in America soft totalitarianism, and I think that's right. It's an attempt to destroy a reputation, to penalize a profession, to exclude someone socially. And the demand is simple: say what we say or pay a price. And that is exactly what happened. I actually have seen today that the Major League Baseball has now said to these players to get with the program. They want them to now comply. And many athletes do. But I am so proud of these men. They chose something increasingly rare. They chose conviction over comfort, and they chose faithfulness over the applause of men. And they did so in one of the most progressive cities in America, while wearing one of the most scrutinized uniforms in professional sports. And friends, that requires courage. Not because writing Genesis 9 on a baseball cap is in and of itself heroic, but because everyone understands the cost. Aaron Renn's negative world thesis, it just feels right. There was a time when Christian belief was viewed positively, and then it became neutral. And now it is viewed often as harmful. Simply believing what Christians have always believed can carry educational, professional, even social consequences. We see that in our story. The pressure is very real, which is why faithful resistance from Christians matters. The kind that says, I cannot affirm what God forbids. So friends, this story is about far more than baseball. It's about whether you will live by truth when lies become fashionable. It's about whether you will remain faithful when faithfulness becomes costly. It's about whether you will fear God more than man. The rainbow over Noah's covenant reminds us that God is the one who defines reality. And no marketing campaign will ever change that. There's no corporate initiative that's going to rewrite that reality. No amount of outrage in response to it can overturn it. The rainbow still belongs to God, and Christians should never apologize for remembering why. And now issue number 3. We live in a moment where millions chase freedom, but very few ask what that freedom is supposed to produce. And every so often, someone answers that question without meaning to.
For like the first time in 20 years, I don't have a tour date on the books, and I don't ever have to have one if I don't want to.
How does that make you feel?
It's a lot of things. It's been like, I've had a little bit of depression. I didn't know what it was from. I think some of it was from there's not a ton to do. Like, there's podcasting.
Yeah.
But I haven't really felt like, I don't know, I haven't felt a lot of motivation. I do know that I want to keep doing it. I don't know if I want to get on stage like right now, but there is part of me that's like, yeah, well, what else do you want to do? What else do you I think I kind of wish that there was like a family aspect in my life right now, like wife and children, but that's not there. So it's like, that's okay.
Oh,
it's just like, you got to wait till that comes along.
Last week, a clip from comedian Theo Von's podcast this past weekend began making the rounds online. I saw it and it caught my attention because in the clip, he said that after 20 years of success and wealth and fame, sold out comedy tours, Netflix specials, one of the most popular podcasts in America, he feels a growing lack of, listen to this, motivation. And here's what he said. Listen to this, because he doesn't have it because he doesn't have a wife or children. He said this, quote, "I think I kind of wish that there was like a family aspect in my life right now, like a wife and children, but that's not there." Then he added something even more revealing. After accomplishing virtually everything he said that he once wanted, he said there is just simply not a ton to do that keeps him engaged. Just think about that for a moment. Von isn't a broke man wishing for stability in life. He isn't a failed comedian wondering what might have been. This isn't a man trapped by failure necessarily, or limited by opportunity even. This is Theo Von. Now, for those that are unfamiliar, Von is a 46-year-old comedian and podcaster. He's an actor. He's in a movie recently. Wouldn't recommend it necessarily. I haven't seen it, but he first gained attention through things like MTV's Road Rules and The Challenge. And he did that before he transitioned into what he's known for today, which is really stand-up comedy. And today he hosts one of the largest podcasts in the world. The podcast that the clip came from regularly ranks near the top of the podcast charts, often trailing only Joe Rogan on Spotify. But nearly 75% of his YouTube audience consists of men under 45. There's just a lot of people who listen to him, men in particular, every week. And really, Von has the ears of a generation. And so we need to think about, what is he telling them here? Well, he's saying that after climbing the mountain of modern success, he has discovered that there wasn't a treasure at the top. His confession struck a nerve with me as I listened to it, because it reveals something that I know that many men secretly fear. They fear that they're not going to get in life what they wanted. Or maybe we could say it this way: getting everything you did want and discovering it doesn't satisfy. For decades, our culture has sold men the idea that freedom is the highest good. But God did not create man to float endlessly through life collecting experiences like Pokemon cards. Genesis does not begin with a man finding himself. It begins with a man receiving a mission. And that mission was for man to build and to cultivate and protect and provide, and really to leave an inheritance. What makes the story even more fascinating to me is that Von's entire career has been seemingly built around creating a sense of connection with others. His podcast has succeeded because Von talks like your cousin sitting across the table after Thanksgiving dinner. It's hilarious. Millions of listeners spend hours with him every week because he feels familiar. He feels personal. He feels like family. And that last one is really the irony, right? If you think about what he said, for one who feels like family, he goes home without one. He has manufactured belonging at an almost exponential scale, yet none of that belonging follows him home at night. Interestingly, last December, actor Matthew McConaughey appeared on Vaughn's podcast, and he made an observation in saying this. He said, having children, in some ways is how we become immortal. Now, if McConaughey means that literally, that's nonsense. But if he means that children allow us to leave a legacy beyond ourselves, he is spot on. And I want to believe it's the latter, and I want to believe that that's part of what's happening in Vaughn's heart and mind right now. But the Christian worldview goes actually even further than that. Children are not merely extensions of our legacy. They are eternal souls entrusted to our stewardship. I've mentioned this before on the podcast. Psalm 127 does not call children burdens. It calls them arrows. Malachi actually says God seeks godly offspring. In other words, the family is not an optional accessory to civilization. It is civilization's very foundational unit. The modern world tells men to chase things like influence, but God tells men to build households. That's why Vaughn's confession strikes a chord for me. It is more than celebrity commentary. It's actually an accidental sermon from the front lines of secular achievement. It's a reminder that God built the world in a certain way, and when you rebel against that design, it produces the same result: emptiness. That's what Vaughn is describing. And perhaps that is why so many men, after chasing every other adventure, eventually find themselves longing for a wife, longing for children, a dinner table, and a home filled with noise. Because deep down, they are not longing for less freedom. They're longing for more purpose. So I say, here's to Theo Vaughn. I pray that he discovers that the greatest adventure is not another special or another tour, another viral clip. It's building a home. May he find that creating a strong family may not earn him headlines, but it remains one of the most successful things a man can do. Hey, thanks again for joining us. If you would, take a second to respond on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on, in particular on YouTube. I want to encourage you to like the video. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and then hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes. We're also on Apple and Spotify podcasts. You can follow us there as well. Turn on the notifications, leave a review. Those reviews, by the way, really help us. Find us on social media. Share the episode there. If you see it, jump into the conversation. Follow us on those accounts. On Instagram, you can follow us at Christian Lee Pod. On Facebook, Christian Lee, just that alone. And then give us a follow on X as well, where you can follow us at ChristianLee_pod. And if you are in the Tulsa area or just passing through, I would love to meet you in person. You can join us at Cross and Crown Church at 10:30 a.m. on Sunday mornings for worship here, where I have the privilege to serve as lead pastor. We meet at Will Rogers Church at 11th and Yale. And finally, as we always say, remember, don't just listen, speak and lead and share the light. And remember that there isn't a corner of this world that doesn't belong to the King.